Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are starting a completely new parsha, of course, this week. It's Parshat Mishpatim, and the word Mishpatim means ordinances. And indeed, this is an incredibly rich parsha when it comes to various halachot, various elements of Jewish law, many of which have to do with civil or criminal law. And it's a very challenging parsha in its own kind of way. So since we did this last year, I'm going to post in the chat. I think this is the... Yep. If you want to check out last year's recordings about it, you can also do that by going to the site, the YouTube site, and typing in the search Mishpatim, Mishpatim, and you'll get all the earlier, just look at the dates on them, and you'll see where we started and where we left off. So at this point, then I'm going to go to share. Oops, let's see. Yeah. And this is where we left off last year. We were actually in the middle of a law. Some of these things are, challenge us. They're very representative of what was going on in those times. This law has to do with a situation where a family is left in a state of dire poverty, and where the father has the legal right to sell his minor daughter, she has to be younger than 12, as a servant. And the idea is that it's not just as a servant, but the idea is that at some point she would actually become the wife of the person, of the man he is selling her to, or the man's son. As I said, it's very important to note that she is less than 12 years old. If she is older than 12, he has no right to do that without her full consent. And please understand, I think most of you know, if not all of you, that in the past, women typically, it was not atypical for a woman to get married at the age of 12 or possibly even younger. And in terms of how people were living back then and what was necessary. For one, polygamy was accepted. There were so many chores and duties that fell upon women that having help in the house could also be helpful. It wasn't necessarily a terrible thing. Although I will tell you that about the year 1000, there's the famous Takana of Rabbeinu Gershom. He was head of the community, the Ashkenazic community. This did not affect Sephardic Jews. It only affected Ashkenazic Jews. And he made several takanot, that is to say, literally it means repairs to Jewish law. One of those takanot was that a Jewish man could only marry one woman. He forbid polygamy, and his authority was such that this was accepted throughout the Ashkenazic Jewish community. The other takana he made was that in the past, prior to that point, it was very, very difficult for a woman to get a divorce from her husband, and he made certain takanot that made it easier for a woman to obtain a divorce from a man who was being recalcitrant. So that's in about the year 1000 where that took place. But in terms of the biblical law, we see here a situation where the Torah is mandating laws regarding a situation where a family has been rendered extremely poor and is unable to sustain itself except through this possibility. But the Torah itself, even though it doesn't go into lots of details, does give some protections for the woman. And if you think of places like Afghanistan or some of those Middle East countries, where women still, the status of women is still a very secondary status. This probably was what was going on for centuries and just never, ever, ever changed. And here, the Torah actually may be acting in a very progressive way by comparison to what was going on, as I said, even in some countries today, where a woman who is left without a husband is in an extremely vulnerable situation. It's still not easy by any means, but generally in Western society, it's a lot better than it was back then. So here goes. So basically, this started a little bit earlier, where it started to discuss this, right? This is where it begins, where it says, V'chi im kor ish, I believe, ish et bito la'ama. If a man sells his daughter as a maidservant, lo tetzeh, she should not go out, ketsei ta'avadim, like slaves, like regular slaves. So what the interpretation of this, the Torah doesn't mention specifically what way, and the truth is that one of the ways in which slaves would be restored to freedom was if they lost a limb or were injured in a particular kind of way. But essentially, if they lost, like if they were working and a tooth was knocked out, or they damaged a toe or a foot, that would be enough for them to gain their freedom. That is not what happens in her case. She is actually compensated. So there are laws in the Torah about compensation. Elsewhere, they're mentioned. The eye for an eye and the tooth for a tooth, that famous statement, is understood in rabbinic interpretation. This is how the Torah is understood, as meaning compensation in various kinds of ways: hospitalization, pain and suffering, loss of labor, and also what was involved in the loss of that particular limb. So she is fully compensated financially, in other words, if this happens to her. That's what it means, because she is not released in that way. First of all, the idea was that he might marry her, and in fact, we're going to see that the intention was that he would marry her, marry the girl. So here we go. Im ra'a be'enei adoneha. So what it's saying is, literally it means if she is wicked in the sight of her master. Asher lo ya'ada, okay? And this is interesting because we notice that there's what is called a ketiv. That is how it's written in the Torah, and it's written lamed aleph in the Torah. But there's a kri. This is actually what it says in Hebrew, kri. Lo kri, meaning this is the way it's understood, okay? And the difference, and I'll explain it in a moment, Ya'ada designated her, Vehefda, he shall redeem her. So what it's saying, okay, let me just make sure I translate this. Asher lo Ya'ada, in that he has not, the word lo with an aleph means not, it's a negation. Lo with a vav means to him. Totally different meanings, right? But they sound exactly the same. So, Asher lo Ya'ada, and what it's saying is, if Rashi will tell us that it means if she does not find favor in the eyes of her master, in that he has not designated her, vehefda, he shall redeem her. So the law with a, so in this case, it means he hasn't in fact designated her. And we're going to see in the Rashi that this is understood as a marriage. In other words, he hasn't married her. He has not formally said that she is designated to him, that he accepts her as a wife, as we will see. The normal way of making a marriage, of contracting a marriage between a man and a woman, as many of you know, is kiddushin. This is called yi'ud. It's a different kind of, there's a different formula involved in this. Rashi is going to give us quite a bit of information regarding that. So If he has designated her, then it's quite possible that he will have to give her a kentubah or some other kind of compensation that would be involved. Okay, so if he has not, it's simply that he redeems her. So essentially, we're saying is if he doesn't love her, right? That's essentially what we're saying. So he can't just now, because her father sold her as a servant, doesn't necessarily mean he can treat her like a servant. Rashi, let's see. Okay, he shall redeem her. Let's see. It goes on, the sentence goes on to say, La'am nochri lo yimshol, he has no right to the mochra, to sell her, la'am nochri. Literally, it means a strange nation. But what it means here, I believe, is to anybody else. Okay, he has no. It's interesting that the Onkelos translated it as Gvar Ocharan or Acharan. He's saying that Legvar Acharan means to another man. So the understanding is that he cannot now sell her to another man, lemochra, to sell her, bevigdo, excuse me, in that he has broken faith, right? Bevigdo and ba, in that he has not, in other words, that he did not marry her. He cannot treat her like that. And as I said, given the time and place that we're talking about, and this is in the Torah, this is amazingly progressive. I know it doesn't sound in our culture, but please judge this at least for its time and place. And it's obviously leaning to us in a certain direction. So, Rashi. By the way, just to notice the tons of Torah T'mima that's involved on almost every single page, because what Torah T'mima does to a very great extent is to try and give us more information as to how the oral Torah interprets the written Torah. Okay, and the written Torah, of course, is what is in front of us. Rashi at least gets us under the surface to understand the traditional way in which the Torah is interpreted, and gives us a very strong foundation in that regard. Right, Rashi, Imra'a be'enei Adonaiha, right? That's the Torah text itself. If she is bad in the sight of her master, and we're given the source of this, the Mechilta, right? Shelo nas'a chen be'einav lechonsa. And what that means is she did not find favor, literally, in his eyes to bring her in. Bringing her in means essentially to marry her, to make a commitment to her. Asher lo ya'ada, and which in that he has not done yi'ud with her. Here we go. Shahaya law, look at this. This is the law with a vav, right? Liya'ada, that it was his duty, he should have, right? Designated her, lahachnisa lo leisha. To bring her in literally means for himself as a wife. The kesef kniyata, Rashi goes on to tell us that the money in her purchase, the money he gave to her father, who kesef kiddusha, that is the same money that under normal circumstances is given in the formal act of marriage, of regular marriage. So a regular marriage between a Jewish man and a woman can be achieved in three ways. And what we're essentially saying is that it formalizes the act to make it now a fully legal act. And the three ways are kesef, meaning where the man gives the woman, because now she's an adult. We're talking generally about an adult woman, where the man gives the woman a sum of money. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. There's some discussion as to exactly how much he's supposed to give her. Incidentally, the ring right now is considered the equivalent of kesef. In other words, an article of intrinsic value. And says to her, in accepting this ring, please become my wife. That's how it's achieved. That's through kesef. Shtar means a contract, where he writes a contract that is now said. A contract itself has no necessarily any intrinsic value. The value of the contract are the words that are on the contract and the statement it's making. That's another way. And bi'ah means cohabitation, where he says to her, if you cohabit with me, know that through this cohabitation, you become my wife. I think that's also known as a common law marriage. Incidentally, that is not considered a proper way in which to marry a woman. In Jewish law, it is stated in the Talmud very clearly that there was a certain rabbi who had the authority and did, in fact, have such a man who did that kind of thing beaten to do that, to treat a woman like that and have her become his wife in that particular way. At any rate, so this is normally the way it's done. So that money that the master, or the husband in this case, or husband to be, ideally, right, paid the father because she was a minor, is supposed to be money that was for the purpose of his marrying her. The kan rimez lecha hakatuv, and here Scripture is suggesting to you, is hinting to you, shemitzvah b'yiud, that there really is a duty, that it's a mitzvah, right, for him to marry this woman, this girl. Rimez lecha, and Scripture also hints. In other words, it's not saying it explicitly, it's only suggesting it to you. So it's also letting you know that she doesn't need another form of kiddushin, right? That's marriage, right? In order to be considered his full wife. That this yi'ud is considered a legal form of marriage. Vehefda. That means he should redeem her. Okay. And it's because it says, and he shall redeem her. It says, yiten la makom lehafdot. It says that what it's understood to mean is that he needs to make it as easy as possible, because this is seen as a positive statement, right? And the ability, lefdot to, or could be lehipadot, to become redeemed, in other words, to gain her freedom, or to release her from this relationship, v'latzeit, and to go out. She'af, going on, she'af hu mesayea b'fiduna, in the sense that he himself has to assist her in her redemption. Umahu makom. So Rashi says, okay, so what do we mean by that, right? What is that exactly when we're saying that? Mahu makom shinotenla. So in what sense does he make it easier? Literally, it means is, what is the place or the space that he gives her? Shemigareya mipijona b'mispar hashanim she'asta etzlo. In that what he does is he reduces the amount of money, right? He paid money for her. And so that's the amount of money that's going to be required for her to be released. But what he does is he diminishes, he takes away from that amount the number of years that she was with him. Ki'ilu hi schura etzlo, as if she was schura. It means not the situation, but that she was a hireling, that she was hired, as if she was paid for this. In other words, paid for her services as a maid. Ketzad, Rashi says, how is this so? What are we talking about specifically as we can get? Hare shekana'a b'mana. Suppose he purchased this, he gave the money, purchased her or obtained her, however you want to say this, acquired her. I guess that would be the best word to use. If he acquired her with a mana, let's say, is the equivalent of 100 pruta. Okay, a mana. V'asta etzlo shtayim shanim, and she was with him for 2 years. Omrim lo, they say to him, Yodea hayita, you knew, they say to him, you knew, she'atida latzeit, that you weren't going to marry her, right? You knew that you weren't going to marry her, that in the future she would be released. The Sof Shana, at the end of 6 years. Remember, that's the amount of time that a Jewish servant works, and then he's supposed to be released in the 7th year. So they say to him, well, you knew that the maximum amount of time that she could serve with you is if you weren't going to be marrying her, was 6 years. Nimtza shekanita avodat kol shana v'shana. So you can figure out that you acquired her services, her labor for each year, b'shishit hamana, in 1/6 of a mana. So each year's labor is the equivalent of 1/6 of a mana, because that's how much you paid. V'asta etzlacha shtayim shanim, and here she worked for you for 2 years. Harei shlishit hamana tol. Okay, so they say 1/3 of the 1/3 of the mana you've already taken. It's saying, right? Harei shlishit hamana. Tol shnei shlishiyot hamana. Tol means to take. Take 2/3 of the mana, v'teitzei me'etzlacha, and she should be released. She should go out from you. So, la'am nochri lo yimshor lemochra. Remember, we said that literally it means to a foreign nation, you have no right, you do not have the authority to sell her. And it's saying she'eno rashai lemochra la'acher. Okay, let me see. Oh, okay, yes. So it says he has no right to sell her to someone else. Lo ha'adon, neither does the master, v'lo ha'av, nor her father. Once she has done that, once this father has sold her, it's a one-time deal, cannot do it again. If the father in this case sold his minor daughter in this particular situation, and she did not remain with the man he sold her to, and she was then released, he cannot sell her again. He has no right to do it. It's done. Again, please consider, I hope, the progressive nature of this. Vevigdo ba, right, when he broke faith with her, imba livgod ba, if he comes to break faith with her, shelo lekayem ba mitzvat yiud. In other words, what do we mean? That he did not fulfill with her the commandment of yiud. V'chein aviha, and likewise her father, me'achar shebagad ba, in the sense that we consider the father to, in a way, have broken faith with her, in the fact that the father did not establish at the get-go, without any question, that this man was going to marry her. Umachra lazeh, and he still went ahead and sold her to this particular individual. Do you want me to pause a moment so you can comment? I mean, there's a lot of information you've had to take in at this point. Yeah.
What I don't understand is,
yes,
the person, okay, so she's been there 2 years, that's 2/6, 1/3.
correct.
She earned 1/3 of that.
Correct.
Who redeeming means paying.
Right.
Who pays? Is this to set her up somewhere else? What does she do? She can't go back to her father, or she could go back to her father. He couldn't support her.
Correct. But remember, he got paid. He got money. Yeah. So it's a good question. No, totally legitimate question. I haven't answered that question. Somehow or other, okay, there has to be some way in which to do this, okay? It was quite common for women not to have, at least for many women, not to have personal income to speak of. But I would say it would basically rest on her father. But it doesn't say here how. Right now, it's the Torah is just telling us that he has to make it as easy as possible. And I think what the Torah is essentially is emphasizing is the idea that she becomes his wife. And I think that is understood as security for her. In other words, it's easy to look at this simply in one way and to find it obnoxious. On the other hand, if you're willing to pull it apart a little bit more, and recognize that in that society, for this young girl to be married to this man was in fact security for her. But I would think that it would now devolve on her father, that the assumption is that now that the father had gained some income from her sale, that he should in fact be the one to help her be released.
He won't have that money 2 years later.
Well, we don't know. We don't know. He may have invested it. He may have purchased seed. He may have planted it. He may have done some labor. Remember, it was primarily an agricultural society, and he could have. I honestly cannot speak with tremendous authority regarding this. It is a question that I have not answered. I haven't found an answer yet. But so I'm saying very clearly that I'm making assumptions. They are saying that the issue here is that it's easier for her to get her freedom again, and that the man himself has to make it possible. And he can't sell her at a profit. He cannot sell her at the same price, at the purchase price. He has to. This is one way in which he has to reduce the original price he paid. But it's your question has to stand. I cannot answer that question well.
I just wanted to mention that in the Chabad translation of the Rashi, it uses maneh instead of mana.
Okay.
And it says that it's 100 zuz.
Okay. I think a zuz and a pruta are the same, but I could be wrong. But thank you. I think that's good. And it is maneh. I'm sorry. I said mana. It is maneh. That is the way that currency is pronounced. But I believe a zuz and a pruta are the same, but I could be wrong. So, any other comments? We're very close to, okay, we can stop here and pick it up tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
I have a
again,
question.
go ahead. Yes, I will. I'll stop
I have
the
a question.
recording. Hold on. Oh, yes, go ahead, Harlan.
I want to know if it's polygamy. You say, what if the man has two wives and he hates the first one that he married, the second one that he married, and he doesn't give her all the compensation that she should get?
So I'm not sure I'm not sure I understand the case you're saying. Are you talking about the woman that the first wife was this young girl that he purchased?
Yeah.
She is given all full rights that I'm aware of. It says it states it in the text. Okay, that he has to treat her as an equal.
Okay. Well, what I can't understand is, what about the women's rights? I mean, what about her? What if she doesn't like the master? I mean, a 12-year-old girl would say, well, I don't like this guy. What is her rights? I mean, she has feelings too. She has very much feelings.
Okay,
It's
so
wrong.
what, thank you. What happens is she also gets released. It says this, whether it's coming up, it may be coming up, in that once she attains majority, once she shows signs of maturity, if he has not married her, she goes free.
Yeah, but that's in 7 years, and the Jubilee.
No, it isn't. Not necessarily, unless she was 5 years old.
Oh, well, what about the Jubilee? She can be released then too.
I'm not sure that this applies to this particular law. Again, that's good. Again, you're digging deeper, right? So that's a good question, and I'm not sure, and I don't know if that's the case. But again, really, ideally, he marries her, right? She becomes his wife.
Well,
Okay.
and today
Are we going to have to go ahead, please?
What I want to know is today, if you can't get a divorce, the man gets a get, they say.
The woman gets the get, by the way.
The woman gets divorced. I don't understand that.
Again, I don't understand the question, Harlan. What do you say?
The question is, if I want to divorce my wife,
Yes.
I mean, if my wife wants to divorce me and I
Yes.
say no because I get a get, is that what they call it?
No. Okay.
I don't have
He
to
gets it.
divorce. She can't divorce me.
Okay,
She can't divorce.
okay, Harlan, okay, so number one, this is a whole different question. All right, it really is. And number two, first of all, it's the woman who receives the get. The man has to give her this document. The get simply is another name for a document, right? A contract, a formal document to say that she was divorced. Okay.
Harlan, your questions are going to be answered in the next, some of your questions will be answered in the next little bit if you read ahead just a smidge.
Okay, so let's stop
That
here.
might help your questions.
Yeah, but we will try and answer them. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording.